Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Birds. Today, we are going to be going over the best draft strategy in 2022 fantasy football, the strategy you need to be implementing to win your leagues. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this strategy, if you agree or disagree. Let me know. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. The first thing that we need to be considering when constructing the perfect 2022 draft strategy is going to be your league settings and roster construction for your particular league. You need to know whether the league is PPR versus standard league. Is this going to make a huge adjustment in the player rankings coming into the draft? For PPR leagues, we obviously want to be shooting the wide receivers up the draft board along with those receiving backs like Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, and Christian McCaffrey. In standard leagues, you have to be favoring running backs like Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, guys who aren't in the receiving game but get a huge workload on the ground. So scoring settings is going to be the main thing that you need to understand going into your league, along with the position limits for your starting lineup. You need to know how many running backs and how many wide receivers. As more leagues transition to 3 wide receiver requirements, that's also going to push the wide receivers up the rankings coming into the draft. So once you got that figured out, then we can move on. We're going to assume that we're playing in half PPR settings with a 10-man league and 3 wide receiver spots to fill that. So we're going to start off with 2 picks, one in the beginning of the first round pick 2 and 3, and then in the second half of the first round, we're going to go around pick 8 and show you our best draft strategy to win fantasy football leagues in 2022. Pulled up, we got the underdog average draft position. This is going to be the most accurate average draft position at this point in the offseason, as these are real money drafts going down every single day. This is definitely the best average draft position board you're going to see. So if we're picking at pick number 2 at this position, obviously Jonathan Taylor is going to be the number 1 pick in every single fantasy redraft league outside of Superflex. He's the undisputed number 1 running back. There's no question about it. But once we get into pick 2 through 5, this is where there's some debate going down. Christian McCaffrey, a lot of people's X list this season due to the 2 years in a row of dealing with injuries. So I can understand people fading Christian McCaffrey. But after that, the running back position, you need to put on hold until the back end of the first round. We need to be drafting these wide receivers in Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase in the beginning of the first round. Once Jonathan Taylor is off the board, you can take your risk with Christian McCaffrey because his ceiling is greater than what these wide receivers are going to do with the running back scarcity. But these wide receivers we need to be keying in on before these older running backs get drafted at the back end of the first round. The Derrick Henrys, the Dalvin Cooks need to wait to the back end of the first round, early second round, given the injury risk that we've seen from these backs the past 5 years. Over the last 5 years, we've only seen 28% of top 5 running backs replicate another top 5 year the next season. This is telling us that these running backs drafted in the first round come with considerable risk due to the injury risk at the running back position in the NFL. These wide receivers are consistently more healthy and are producing at a much more consistent clip. This is why in the first round, I want to be drafting wide receivers, and in particular, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase in the beginning top 5 picks where running backs used to reign supreme in fantasy drafts. So we're going to go from pick 2. We're going to start off with Cooper Kupp, our number 1 wide receiver off the board. At the second pick, we're taking Cooper Kupp. You can consider Christian McCaffrey just because of that ceiling, but the injury risk, we want to fade McCaffrey at least at the number 2 pick when Cooper Kupp is such a guaranteed commodity. We know exactly what we're getting. We saw one of the best wide receiver seasons in NFL history last year. So Cooper Kupp's definitely a guy we want to be taking early in the top 3 picks of fantasy drafts. Once we get to pick 8, this is where we can start having an argument about those running backs. If we look at underdog ADP, these running backs are going at the end of the first round, but I'm taking Stefan Diggs, Travis Kelce, and Devontae Adams over these guys due to the running back depth that we are seeing in the 4th through 6th rounds of drafts this year. We haven't seen these running backs be this valuable in the middle rounds the past couple of years, but this season these running backs are falling to the middle rounds, allowing us to grab these wide receivers early in the first round that have the highest ceiling possible. Stefan Diggs, Devontae Adams, I'm taking them over these older running backs that have considerable injury risk coming into the 2022 season. If it's not a PPR league, Austin Eckler is going to be grouped in with that Derrick Henry, that Dalvin Cook class. All 3 of these running backs dealing with some sort of injury in the past 2 years. With this injury risk, we want to be looking at these wide receivers, and Stefan Diggs is going to be our number 4 wide receiver After you get through Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase, we want to be targeting Stefan Diggs. And these wide receivers or tight end and Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews in the first 2 rounds are so appealing because the stack value that they add potentially later in the draft. You're able to get Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, these quarterbacks that go with these top end wide receivers and tight ends for a great stack value. And we want to be targeting these stacks because of the correlation in these bets that we're making. We want to make this bet on Stefan Diggs and grab Josh Allen with the correlation, as if Steph Diggs is going to provide the value that we're drafting him at in the first round, then Josh Allen is also going to have to be a good quarterback in fantasy for Stefan Diggs to provide the value. You're building in that correlation that's going to increase your ceiling in fantasy. Yeah, it's going to lower your floor a bit, but we want to be shooting for the best possible outcome, the championship team here, and building these correlations with these wide receivers and their quarterbacks on that team is a great way to increase the ceiling. To relate this stat comparison, we're going to look at last year. If you drafted Mike Evans in your fantasy leagues, you had around a 30% chance of making the fantasy football playoffs. If you drafted Tom Brady, you also had around a 30% chance, as these were both really good options in drafts. Tom Brady, probably one of the best quarterbacks from fantasy perspective last season. But if you were able to get both of these guys on your team, you build in that stack correlation like we're talking about, the Tom Brady, Mike Evans stack, you're increasing your chances of making the playoffs by nearly 20% just by adding them together. So we really need to be targeting these guys, and going wide receiver early in these drafts allows you to build those stacks. With this added possibility of grabbing Josh Allen potentially later in the draft, Steph Diggs is going to be a great option at the wide receiver position in the first round. He's going to be our first pick at pick number 8 in this draft. Similarly to Steph Diggs and Josh Allen, we're drafting Travis Kelce, been the most consistent tight end in fantasy over the past 5 seasons. We're looking at 4 straight tight end 1 finishes for Travis Kelce, and last season tight end 2 finished just behind Mark Andrews. Kelce is a aging tight end, but given the volume opportunity he's going to see in Kansas City this year with Tyreek Hill being traded to Miami, it should be able to offset any regression we see from Travis Kelce from a talent perspective due to him being a 32-year-old tight end. So with this volume here, Travis Kelce's no doubt one of the safest players you can draft in fantasy this year. That's what you need to be focusing on in the first 4 rounds. You want to be picking safe players that have minimal opportunities to bust. And Travis Kelce is a great player to draft with 5 straight tight end top 2 finishes overall in fantasy football. We love taking Travis Kelce and maybe even pairing him with Patrick Mahomes at a later point in this draft. If we're going back to the team that drafted Cooper Kupp with the number 2 overall pick, okay passing on those running backs in the first half of the first round because of the availability that we're going to see at the end of the second round with Saquon, Barkley, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette. These guys are readily available at the end of the second round. And I'm more than okay taking a Saquon Barkley even with the injury risk because we know the ceiling that he has. But if you want to avoid that risk with Saquon Barkley like we've seen over the past couple of seasons, you can take a guy like Aaron Jones and be just fine with that. Leonard Fournette, these guys that don't have as much of an injury history and still fill that running back spot while still getting the top end wide receiver talent in Cooper Kupp in the first round. A great guy to pair with Cooper Kupp, getting both stud wide receiver and a potential stud running back. We're going to go with Saquon Barkley here. Then we're going to grab Tyreek Hill, another elite wide receiver available to us in the beginning of the third round. There are question marks with Tyreek Hill in Miami. If Tua can provide value to Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, and even Mike Gesicki. If you don't want to take a Tyreek Hill, there's still other available wide receivers here. We want to be hammering in at least 2 of these wide receivers through the first 3 rounds of all of these drafts. That is very key, as we know the wide receiver position is going to be more consistent at providing you value in these top 4 picks. So you can consider Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins is readily available, and also Keenan Allen. Any of these 3 guys to pair with the elite ceiling in a Cooper Kupp and a Saquon Barkley, you're looking very well. But we're going to go with Tyreek Hill and Saquon Barkley around the 2-3 turn for this Cooper Kupp team. That's going to bring us back to our number 8 pick that has Stefan Diggs and Travis Kelce, going a little bit of no RB strategy. But like we talked about, we are not worried about no running back this season, as the value at running back position comes later in this draft. Coming up in the 3rd round for this pick 18, we have a bunch of guys, great players still available. That's why a lot of people prefer picking later in the draft this season, just how the board shakes up. Still good wide receivers available at 28. You could see a Keenan Allen on the board, Michael Pittman, and even these running backs are still available in the third round of most drafts. Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, guys with high PPR value, targeted heavily out their backfield, which we know in standard leagues isn't going to provide much value at all. But in these PPR leagues, in these half PPR leagues, these running backs with pass catching value are still going to be there for you to take in the third and fourth round, like DeAndre Swift was last season when he had a huge impact in fantasy. But for this Stefan Diggs, Travis Kelce team, we're not too pressured to go on running back because we know the value is coming later. So we're going to go with Keenan Allen and Josh Allen to pair that stack with the Stefan Diggs, because we know if Stefan Diggs provides us value in the first round, then Josh Allen is going to be a good fantasy quarterback. We're getting that direct correlation, increases our potential ceiling to win our league. So we'd love that if we can get Josh Allen to stack with Stefan Diggs. We're going to take. So with that said, we're going to take Keenan Allen and Josh Allen, pairing our Buffalo Bills, who could have the best offense in the National Football League, getting their two top producers. Crazy upside on this team so far. You can even take a running back here if you feel pressure to, but like I said, they are coming in the draft. You're still going to get good value to fill that hole while filling out the entire rest of your roster with two great wide receivers, the top tight end, and the top quarterback in this draft. If you don't feel confident a quarterback this early in the fourth round, you can consider the guys that we mentioned earlier, the Kamaras and the Etiennes, which still going to provide you with a very flexible roster that you can go running back, wide receiver, going forward throughout the draft. But like we said, we are willing to wait on the running backs coming later. Let's hop back over to this team at pick number 2 that comes off a very balanced start with Cooper Kupp, Saquon, Barkley, and Tyreek Hill. Huge upside at all three positions. At this point in the draft, there's still some great wide receiver options that we need to be considering at pick 39 to pair along with Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, Deontae Johnson, Jalen Waddle, all great options here. The running backs are still in a great position where you can grab value later on, so we want to be double tapping wide receiver at this position. We're going to choose our favorite wide receivers, Hollywood Brown and Deontae Johnson, two great wide receivers that have a lot of upside in PPR settings. Getting a new quarterback in Kyler Murray for Hollywood Brown, great breakout potential there. And Deontae Johnson, a PPR maniac, even with new quarterbacks in Pittsburgh. So with the Saquon Barkley pick in the second round, we feel absolutely no pressure to go out and reach on a running back. We can keep hammering these wide receivers. Now we have 4 wide receivers through 5 rounds with great upside that we can slot in our wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 positions, and even a flex. So I love hammering these wide receivers and getting the running back value that we are going to see in the next 2 rounds just fall to us, and it's going to be complete this team in an amazing way. For our team on the right, still no running backs through 4 rounds. This is going to be the 0 RB strategy that a lot of people are scared to take on in fantasy football, but it is the new age in fantasy. With all the offenses transitioning to pass-heavy offenses, the wide receivers are providing so much more value than your running backs that are nearly all shaping up to be committees around the NFL. Very few backfields don't have committee opportunities, and this is lending itself to fantasy, and these wide receivers are getting pushed up the board, and you need to be grabbing them early before they're gone. Here in the 5th and 6th round, this team's going to be able to grab 2 running backs that we still love in fantasy that have RB1 potential, and you're getting them after you already snagged 2 wide receiver 1s, a tight end 1, and the quarterback 1 overall. At this point in the draft, once we grab all those guys, these running backs available to us look very enticing. David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, J.K. Dobbins, and even maybe Cam Akers. All these running backs available in the 5th round for you to take after filling out the rest of your roster. I will happily take David Montgomery here in the draft. A running back 1 from a season ago, did deal with some injury, but you're getting him in the 5th round behind all those elite wide receivers. And the wide receiver opportunity cost really isn't that high with Brandon Cooks coming off a struggling Houston Texans offense. These are the running backs that I want to be taking when the wide receivers available are nowhere near similar value. You're not passing on these top-end wide receivers. You're grabbing these running backs at a huge discount. David Montgomery should provide great value in this new-look Bears offense. And we're grabbing J.K. Dobbins on the swing around of the draft, a guy coming off an injury but is 100% healthy coming into the season. We're pairing 2 guys in the 5th and 6th rounds that both have RB1 upside in this offense, and we're getting them after we filled out our entire starting lineup. So this is a great strategy just because the value at running back has never been this deep in fantasy drafts. We love taking these guys behind the wide receivers, and this team is absolutely incredible, and this goes for nearly all drafts where these guys are falling in value. It's going to be similar on the other end. Team 1 is also going to take Josh Jacobs in the 6th round, completing its roster out, grabbing 4 wide receivers and 2 running back ones with potential, grabbing 4 wide receivers to play wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 and fill out that flex spot, while also grabbing 2 running backs that can be RB1s on any given week. Both these teams set up in the beginning of the 1st round and the end of the 1st round have both created a very solid roster moving forward throughout the draft, filling in some key positions like quarterback for team 1 and tight end. But this team is in such a great position, grabbing those running backs later in the draft. That's the main thing that we want to be putting across here. The values here in the 5th round for these running backs. You have to be taking these guys and passing on those older running backs at the end of the 1st round, like a Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. We want to be grabbing these wide receivers early in drafts to set up that correlation and stacks with those quarterbacks. This is going to be the optimal draft strategy going forward in 2022 fantasy football. We thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.